you know what sort of film you're watching because you
Yeah.
start with the jazz swing music coming in like and then all of a sudden it's like ultra violence and it's like
We are doing our second David Lynch film on Foreplay this week, and it will be Wild at Heart. For those of you who didn't hit the top of our arc, and we started with Blue Velvet, then Wild at Heart. Next week is Lost Highway. Week after that is Mulholland Drive. I should have mentioned this earlier to you guys about Wild at Heart. It is not available anywhere, surprisingly. If you would like to watch it, it is on the Internet Archive where you can download it or watch it online for free, but it is not available on any streaming services. So you will have to either get creative or purchase a hard copy of this movie in order to watch it.
That's interesting. I already had it on Blu-ray, so it didn't affect me. I didn't even look into it. So
yes, currently unavailable anywhere, which is weird.
I'm amazed it doesn't have like a Criterion or something.
Yeah.
There are many Lynch films on Criterion right now. There are many Lynch films on HBO Max. This is not one of them. It has completely slipped through the cracks for whatever reason, and it hasn't been available, I think, digitally for some time. But like I said, it is on the Internet Archive, so if you search for Wild at Heart Internet Archive, you will be able to find it and watch along with us. Otherwise, perhaps you're tech savvy and you know some solutions, or you like to go onto eBay and purchase a Blu-ray disc, whatever means you have to get a hold of this film, because it is a good movie and it's a very interesting movie. Definitely has a lot, as a kind of romance chase movie. It has a lot of the DNA of Bonnie and Clyde and Natural Born Killers, which is released later on. But it also has a pretty impressive cast, obviously with Nicolas Cage and Laura Dern, but also Willem Dafoe in an extremely good performance. Isabella Rossellini, who is the lead in Blue Velvet, and especially, I have to say, your guy, Calvin Lockhart.
He's back.
He's back.
This
Richard,
was the same year he did King Willie and Predator 2. And so like the when I was doing the research, because I knew like Calvin Lockhart was in this obviously, but apparently like David Lynch just liked him so much that he gave him like a really small bit part role in the Fire Walk with Me movie. I think he plays like an electrician or something. And they even used unused scenes from that in the third season of Twin Peaks posthumously after Calvin Lockhart died. So listen, you will never get another movie as long as you live with a werewolf break, but we've always got time for Calvin Lockhart.
So Calvin Lockhart, if you guys missed it, was from The Beast Must Die. Yeah,
that's even
Richard
something I was thinking when the opening credits come up. Is like, this is like the who's who of cult classic films in America.
Yeah,
it comes up and it's like William Dafoe, Crispin Glover, Calvin Lockhart, Harry Dean Stanton, Isabella Rossi. Like, these are all just people who are in all the cult classics, but they're all in one film. And the actual cast is mega long. Like, the amount of people, you'll recognize every single character actor in this film.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's kind of weird because it's like, it's not an ensemble, because they don't really get a lot of screen time. Yeah, and like one thing that we'll probably touch upon with the movie is the editing is kind of a bit strange. Like, it's not typical, I should say, because unlike some other Lynch movies where I think he does a kind of, well, I don't want to say a better job necessarily, a different job of how it sort of tells the story and sets things up, where there are like adjoining scenes that explain this is how they got from here to here, this is why this happened, this is who this person is. The scenes in Wild at Heart just kind of happen, and they're there. It's a scene, these people are in the scene, and it's like, you understand narratively what's going on, but the connective tissue, it's like David Lynch just thought, you know what, we're just gonna cut all of that out. I consider that to be fat. I don't consider that to be necessary to tell a good story. And so we are just going to float from scene to scene to scene to scene, and in almost every scene, it's Sailor and Lula fucking a lot of the time. And by the way, I have to say this: I haven't watched this movie for a long time, as I said on the last episode. the amount of breasts in this movie are fucking insane. There are so many tits in this movie. It is fucking crazy. And like, I never want to say like gratuitous when it comes to like filmmakers that I respect, like David Lynch. This might be gratuitous. Like, there is literally a scene where they introduce a bad guy. He is taking a shit on a toilet, sipping a cup of tea from like a perfect china cup, whilst the naked woman's just dancing while he's having a shit. It's like, what is happening?
Have a beautiful day. We are.
What is happening in this film? So it is a crazily paced movie. And yeah, you just in a very, it's almost more like, you know, John Waters in a way. You just meet these characters and they're in for a scene and then they're gone. You know, they're like it's like just it's just a Lynchian world. You know, all these people, all these fucking weirdos are out there in big tuna. And you meet them for 5 minutes, and you go, I wonder what this nutter's going to do. Nothing. He's just a nutter. He's just a nutter in a trailer park. Just deal with that. So.
That's what I like about the film, though. Like, I actually think this is one of the best David Lynch films. I thought it held up really well on the rewatch. Actually, I told you some of the other ones I've been underwhelmed by before. I actually really enjoyed this. First of all, it's mega stylish. Every scene's got like a different color filter applied to it, different shots, etc. Think about how many stylish moments there are. First of all, what we said on that Blue Velvet one, there's about 4 scenes where someone's a lounge singer or has a microphone and croons like an old American classic, like some sort of like that's a massive part of it as well. It's about the visual of the singer and the spotlight, etc. And then think about, for example, some of the crazy characters that get introduced. So, for example, one of the things they also do here is they never just introduce you to a character immediately. You always find out like the horror of the Santos guy before you meet him. Then when there's that woman who's like the fucking crazy like voodoo victim or whatever, you just see that silhouette of her introduced on the floor. I think that's mega. This is like I was fucking eating that up. It's like a visual feast to me. Also, by the way, the soundtrack is straight fire. I actually think this and Lost Highway are phenomenal soundtracks. Like it's a mixture of rock, but jazz and swing music. This is another film, by the way, that's clearly like a love letter to Americana. I've actually got a couple. We can talk about some other things later, but I've actually got 2 brief things I want to mention as well that fans of this show will appreciate. They are trivia to past episodes of this show. So one. Tell me when you see Willem Dafoe, he didn't look like Charlton Heston in Touch of Evil. He looked exactly like Charlton Heston in Touch of Evil. Literally looked like he was playing Charlton Heston in Touch of Evil on some Robert Downey Jr. shit. And then the other one was, again, just because, even though it has nothing to do with it, I doubt it's even an ad lib, when they do that scene where Nicolas Cage explains, he goes, I take a bite of that peach. Tell me you didn't think about Face Off. That wasn't straight in your mind, burned in there.
Spreads her legs real wide and says to me,
take a bite of peach.
Was that some sort of a callback? Probably wasn't. Probably just.
Well,
but anyway, I think it's just a really fun movie. How are you, Richard? There's not really actually to me an overarching narrative. Like it's fairly loose. The whole thing of like, oh, they're on the run and you know they're trying to get killed.
This is the crazy thing, Duncan. Like because this comes out in 1990. What people probably don't appreciate is whether you like this movie or hate this movie, its DNA. It's basically like the fucking dude at the start of Prometheus, and it just goes out into the cinema. Because I mean, look, this was a movie that didn't make a lot of money, was very divisive, but it won a Palme d'Or.
Exactly. And it does have all of the David Lynch DNA. I mean, we talked about all of the things that David Lynch does, and it feels like he's kind of in his groove at this point in time, things that he was exploring previously. I mean, he's the master of the dissolve transition. Like this is true of his entire oeuvre is like his ability to like dissolve one scene into the next is dreamlike, and he finds similar objects or themes in order to create the dissolves. And he's also the anti-king of slow motion, where I have to watch a match in slow motion for no reason and it looks like shit a lot of the time, or flags waving in slow motion at the end of a scene for, as far as I can tell, no discernible reason.
But this is what I mean, though. This is ultimately like David Lynch directing Badlands, right? And then what ends up happening is, if you look at what happens in the 90s, and remember, this is 1990s, which is right at the start. There's a ton of movies about like white trash criminals who are like star-crossed, highly sexualized lovers going on crime sprees in a road trip across America. There's tons of these.
Natural Born Killers.
You've already said Natural Born Killers. True Romance.
Yes,
right?
true.
Both of them scripted by Tarantino, which, by the way, there's no way Tarantino didn't know what Wild at Heart was. He's never made any direct reference I could find to like whether it was an inspiration or
Yeah,
not.
but of course he would have watched this.
Sure, absolutely, it would have been in his wheelhouse. But then on top of that, you've got there's the little known California with a K, which was kind of an inverse of the
Brad
trope
Pitt,
because yeah, with Brad Pitt. That's the one with David Duchovny. They're the intellectuals, and they pick up the white trash on a road trip, and then they're forced into a weird sexual, violence situation. Thelma and Louise, of course. That's the lesbian equivalent of this kind of thing, and it's it's a trope that, as you said, it's got a touchstone to Bonnie and Clyde in there, but the idea of the like criminals going on the run across America and ending up in ultimately doomed situations. The one thing I'll say about this movie is, and maybe you want to do the Monty capsule synopsis now, is this tells you all you need to know about the fact that David Lynch actually was an optimist at heart. A lot of people associate David Lynch with dark films, like because of how he arrived on the scene with the Razorhead. But David Lynch is actually an optimist. He changed the source material by Barry Gifford. He changed the source material to have a happy ending.
I actually think this movie's incredibly optimistic.
Yes. Yeah. It's got some like unbelievable. I mean, like we'll definitely talk about some of the really dark parts, which like I'd totally forgotten about the rape stuff.
Oh no, that's wild, isn't it?
Yeah, I know, it's so much like. But anyway, I mean, like he wrote a happy ending at an end of a movie where the source material didn't have a happy ending, and then you look at like all of Lynch's movies, like The Elephant Man. It's sad that the Elephant Man decides to go to bed like a real boy, and his giant swollen head crushes him to death. But if you remember that, the woman behind the radiator comes out and goes, "It's okay, it'll be okay." And at the end, you've got Laura Palmer comes down, and she's the good witch, and she's like, "If you're wild at heart, then you must fight for your dreams." What a fucking great message that is.
I'm wild at heart.
If you're truly wild at heart, you'll fight for your dreams.
And kind of like when I was looking into it, because I was like, actually, yeah, when you look at David Lynch's filmography, they're all kind of very positive messages in a bizarre, fucked up way. There's actually a quote David Lynch said, which I found, which I thought was kind of fascinating. And he said, "Negativity is the enemy of creativity." And I think that's just like kind of, if you had to kind of sum up, like, you combine it with his love of Americana and how he like views all of these things as like pure, and whenever a negative force is coming from the outside, it's always like a corrupting influence on something that's like pure and good. Like think about Twin Peaks, for instance. Twin Peaks isn't about the murder of Laura Palmer. It's about the life of Laura Palmer and lamenting the loss of someone who was a good person in terrible circumstances. That's like a very pure-hearted way to come at like that particular type of story, the murder of a young girl. So actually watching this back now, having not seen it for a long, long time, and I prefer Lost Highway to this movie, and Lost Highway couldn't have happened without this movie.
Barry Gifford, by the way.
Reasons. Yeah, exactly, correct. Wrote that screenplay together. I actually think Lost Highway is the better movie, but I mean, this movie did give me like a renewed appreciation of just David Lynch in general. Actually,
It's like I said, I actually think
we'll get to.
This is actually the film, if someone had never watched David Lynch, they'd have a chance to potentially get into. It doesn't have, like, even the weirdness just adds in somewhere to sort of, like, the background. Like, what's funny is, like you said about the rape scene, almost everything that's really dark, they just, like, almost euphemistically talk about. So, for example, like, she says she was raped, but my mother knew nothing about that. The mother comes straight in the room the second the guy's done it. Then it's like, oh, and then, the pooch guy just had a car accident, and then it's like he's fucking just goes straight off a cliff in, like, a car that's on, like, blown blown up or whatever. Then and then he set himself on light. He's obviously just been set alight by. So like, it's actually the darkness is all just like lurking behind, but it's all like euphemistically covered up. And so, no, I agree with you, Richard. What's funny is people are going to see this and think it's something like Natural Born Killers. To me, if anything, this is almost like a fucking soliloquy on like reckless young love and what it means to just surrender to that completely in spite of everything. So I actually think that's one of the coolest parts about it. Then obviously they try to play on like the surrealistic elements. Then you can take them or leave them in this film. You don't really have to like take those on board. Like a lot of it, I agree with you. A lot of it also has like a carnival feel of like, here's just some weird character of like, oh, he's crazy, this person, or it's just weird, or like for example, this almost feels like someone was taking loads of short stories and then building them into a bigger narrative, almost like a William Burroughs or something. Because for example, like think of like the Crispin Glover character. Like, what even is that story?
We used to call him Jingle Dale. He wanted Christmas to last all year long. He sure would scream out when his mama told him it was summertime and Christmas was 6 months off.
In fact, most of the stories they tell in the pillow talk after sex are just these really weird vignettes of like an alien character that could only exist in America, and you sort of like, okay, and then they just go to the next scene. But the thing is, I actually did find them to be quite well done. They were quite interesting. I was quite enthralled by most of them. And again, it's just an excuse to bring in a great character actor that just does one scene.
I also think it's interesting that people criticize the amount of sex in this movie, because I actually find a lot of the sex, especially between Sailor and Lula, to be very necessary to the point, Thorne, that you're talking about young love and about this unbridled passion that you have where you just want to go out and go to a metal concert and then go back and fuck. I think it's very true. And we don't get that if we just delete the sex scenes. We actually just don't get that energy at all. And I think both Laura Dern and Nicolas Cage do a good job of kind of living in that moment. And I also think that the key underpinning of this movie is that everything surrounding Lula and Sailor is incredibly nihilistic, right? There's career criminals. Her mother is cast as the evil witch from The Wizard of Oz, who's trying
actress as well. What kills that role completely as well. Totally believable. Yeah, so she's trying to actually murder Sailor and has worked with organized criminals to murder people before. And she's the protective, overprotective mother who's the force of darkness, while her daughter is out there forging her own path with a guy who is honestly very decent. His crime was driving a car when he didn't know that her husband was going to get killed by the gangster that had driven them. And then he goes to jail because she sets him up into a situation where he has to fight for his life. And then he goes to jail the second time because he's trying to get enough money to take care of his child that's going to be born, and Lula. His intentions are very pure, I would say, throughout this entire movie. And he does seem like an upstanding guy. Even at the end, he is basically walking away from them because he feels he's been nothing but trouble.
I will add, he didn't have to beat that guy to death in the opening scene. I just want to listen. I'm not going all the way with
I don't know, Richard. When somebody comes at me with a switchblade, I'm going to make sure they're done. I'm going to make sure they're done.
His brain's dragging out the back of his head, Monty. He was done a long time ago. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but
like,
that's also why you know what sort of film you're watching, because you start with the jazz swing music coming in, like, do, and then all of a sudden it's like ultra violence, and it's like, smashing the guy's fucking head, and there you go, you're off to the races, mate. And that's also another scene which keeps having details added as the film goes on to reveal what happened. You know,
it's not a Rashomon-esque thing.
No. The thing is,
all the details are the same, but it keeps building on it, which is great.
He's provoked within all of these situations, and there's some exterior force. I think he genuinely wants to be a good person, and that's where he kind of ends up at the end when he comes back to Lula and Pace, their son. I get the sense that that's what's so optimistic about this, is there is a sense of love conquers all here. And even though the darkness is swirling around them constantly, and there is a big undercurrent of nothing fucking matters. There is a huge, huge undercurrent of nihilism that these criminals just do whatever they want. People die arbitrarily. He ends up in prison arbitrarily twice, right? Despite the fact that nobody even bothers to check that he was attacked first with a knife, right? He just ends up for manslaughter. He doesn't actually commit really any of the crimes in the robberies that Bobby Peru, Willem Dafoe's character, is committing. And he surrenders basically instantly. So yes, he had an intention to rob, but he wasn't the one shooting the people.
I mean, the scene that really, for me, sums up the nihilistic reality of the world in which they live is when they're just driving down that road and they just come across that car accident.
Yep, exactly.
And they watch Sherilyn Fenn just die.
Yeah, exactly. And you get
just died. Oh, Sailor, she just died right before our eyes. It's just
but you get the sense that
she died right in front of us, Sailor. Why'd she have to go and do that, Sailor?
Let's get out of here, honey.
death is arbitrary in these moments, and that could have easily been them, right? Driving off the road and flipping the car. They're in a convertible from the 80s that they're not wearing seatbelts. I mean, those things were incredibly dangerous if you fucked up driving them, right? They could have been dead in an instant. But that doesn't prevent them from really, I think, living their lives as deeply as possible and being in love and trying to be with each other and having this adventure, right? And in a way, it is.
But I also think you have to acknowledge how vacuous both of them kind of are, which is fine, because I think first of all, you know, you're in that kind of relationship. You know, I don't know how old Sailor's meant to be. I don't think it's explicitly said, but like Lula is 20. And obviously Sailor's older, but you know, she's 20, and it's exactly like you said. I mean, look, we've all been in those relationships.
But they're taking responsibility, Richard. You call them vacuous, but Lula makes a conscious decision to keep the kid and raise the kid, and Sailor makes a conscious decision to go back and be part of that family.
Sure, but what I mean is just in terms of like how they view the world and what they're thinking about and stuff. It's very, you know, it's very forthright. Like when you have a snakeskin jacket, that is your statement.
By the way, best line of the movie
about personal freedom. Or
and for me, it's a symbol of individuality and my belief in personal freedom, which is
A surprise for you.
Hey, my snakeskin jacket! Thanks, baby! Did I ever tell you that this here jacket represents a symbol of my individuality and my belief in personal freedom?
About 50,000 times.
Here's why I think that's fire, because
line.
that is exactly the sort of thing a stupid, pretentious young person thinks is their identity. It's like, oh, look, I've got a jacket, though. Yeah, it's the sort of thing. Like the joke is a haircut is your personality when you're a teenager.
It's on point, and the way he says to her when she brings it when he gets out of prison, he goes, "Have I ever told you?" And then says the catchphrase, and she goes, "Only about 50,000 times." And it's like, obviously, look, like the character of Sailor is actually quite brilliantly realized because he is an Elvis action figure. That's what he is. He wants to be Elvis. He admires Elvis. By the way, also see True Romance.
Like him. Just
right?
like him. Yeah.
Like literally, the protagonist of True Romance has the same fascination and hallucinates Elvis as an imaginary friend, brilliantly played by Val Kilmer, off camera. But he's an Elvis action figure who wants to be, you know, like the quiff and the, you know, pop-up snakeskin jacket, and he's got the, you know, the hot girl, but like there's really not much more to him than that. He's a creature of impulse. All of his problems stem from that, essentially, all of the issues they get themselves into. So what I'm saying is, I think it's essential. I think David Lynch quite often, based on all of his material, I think quite often he thinks there's some kind of aspect of innocence and purity that is interwoven without intellectualism. I think
yes.
He, very, very rarely does he portray an intellectual character as being like innocent and pure. It's like
I also think that
is kind of an exception in that sense.
He plays with innocence in a very interesting way in this movie, like you're saying, Richard, because people would consider the debaucherous actions not innocent, but the way in which they are engaging that with them is quite innocent. In fact, the way they engage with violence is innocent. The way they engage with sex is innocent. The way they engage with organized criminals is innocent. It's very interesting.
I mean, I have to say as well, one thing that really stood out and as being, and I think this is a fantastic positive for the movie. Apparently, Laura Dern said she was attracted to the part because she wanted to play someone who wasn't just a very sexual person, but someone who was incredibly comfortable, you know, with herself, with who she is, which is absolutely on point for the character of Lula. And you know, you think about Laura Dern and the other Lynchian, you know, compare it to Blue Velvet, for instance, it's day and night. But what I have to say is, this is probably a time in 1990 before intimacy coordinators, like. Sure. The fucking they do, and like there's a reality to the post-coital cigarettes that they all smoke. If you love close-ups of cigarettes, you're gonna love this movie, guys. You know, they'll be doing the post-coitus, and again, we've all been there. We've all just been lying. You know, you've been giving it your fucking best. You're just having a cigarette, you know, catching your breath for round two, and you're talking bollocks. You're talking utter nonsense, just whatever shit comes into your dopamine saturated brain. And they nail that. And there's like moments where their legs are entwined, you know, they're in like weird positions on the bed, probably just where they ended up, you know, decoupling like machinery. And there's moments where like Nicolas Cage will just lean across and like stroke her nipple, and you're like, these are actors doing this. And there's like a weird intimacy to it, which is like very real, but also within the context of like movies these days. You know, that would be something like, I imagine, perhaps a bit more shocking, almost by today's standards, than it would have been back then, because obviously we know now people have a more sensitive approach to this kind of subject matter. But I mean, they are, for the first 30 minutes, they're fucking in every other scene. They're in bed in every other scene. Like, it's crazy. They go out, they have an encounter, they have some drinks, they go to a hotel room and they fuck. They're in a car, right? Let's pull into a hotel, let's have some drinks, let's dance. Now we're fucking. It's like it's wild. It's you know, I'd totally forgotten like just how much sex there was in this film actually.
Have you been noticing the build-up in traffic?
Here she goes again.
I'm sorry, sailor, but that ozone layer's disappearing.
I think it's necessary to set up, the characters and everything.
I'm not saying I would change it. The rape stuff, I got to be honest, I don't know how well that's aged for me. I think, again, that's not something you can necessarily get away with now, because there's two problems with it. It's not necessarily that she's a sexual assault survivor. If anything, that adds, I mean, I guess with a very crude, probably pseudo-chauvinistic eye, it does add a sense of empowerment to it that she still remained a sex-positive person, maybe. I don't know. That might be just some wanky bollocks. Who knows? And some of the scenes, like the abortion scenes a bit, did that... Because it links the abortion scene, which is... By the way, I'm pretty sure that's not how they do them, but I don't know. It looks like something out of a fucking horror movie. The abortion scene is how she... figures out she's pregnant, because obviously so it's alluded to, it's something she's gone through before. And then when Willem Dafoe turns up and sexually assaults her, and you're like, oh no, not a survivor of sexual assault being sexually assaulted in the movie by the ugliest man ever to have existed. Not Willem Dafoe, but the character he plays, Bobby Peru.
And his fake teeth.
His teeth are unreal. He got that esports smile, and he grabs her, and then there's that weird moment where it's like, I hate when they walk up to the line of like, oh, she's actually secretly enjoying it. It's weird, it's like that's what they're kind of alluding to, and then he just completely withdraws from it, and actually it was just to humiliate her. Like, it's like, oh, it's. Ugh. I mean, listen, obviously you can make an argument within the terms of the film. Maybe it's necessary for the Bobby Peru character. I just don't really... I think within the totality of the movie, I don't know if that scene actually does anything other than make you hate Bobby Peru, which there's a million other ways you can do it. I think probably by modern sensibilities, maybe that scene shouldn't be there. That's kind of how I felt.
Someday, honey, I will. But I gotta get going.
Everything else fine. You know,
I think
like
the
that.
other side of that is Willem Dafoe does an amazing job of delivering that monologue, and it is incredibly fucked up. And just his performance is amazing in that scene.
If you watch they do these I don't know if is it Vanity Fair that does them. They do these videos where they get like an actor to talk about like their various roles, and they'll watch back some footage and then they'll spit out some anecdotes. Great format. And Willem Dafoe has said like the way into that character was the prosthetic teeth. It was the false teeth. He said he couldn't. He said he found the character so loathsome he couldn't quite get there, and then he said, as soon as I put them teeth in, it just all clicked. So I mean, it's a wonderful use of prosthesis to essentially conjure up something very odious. And Bobby Peru is like, he's a great character within the context of the movie. I just had a few reservations about that scene. That scene felt very 90s. Yeah, I just don't think you would see something like that today. But I think everything else in the movie. I love the shootout.
Hold it around, shoot!
That is so Tarantino, and this is all pre-Tarantino's rise, essentially. That shootout at the end is so hilariously over the top violent. It's like it's hard to imagine again Tarantino wasn't inspired on some level with that, because it is just it's raucously funny. Like I'd totally forgotten about.
It's too much for me, man. I mean, the dog with the hand at the end is like way too much.
Which Roger Ebert says is a fucking reference to Yojimbo. But like, surely it's a reference. There's that film. What's that film with where a guy gets his penis chopped off and a dog runs away with it? It's a John Waters movie.
Right.
Can't remember what it's called. It's definitely that. It's definitely that it's referencing. But I mean, I think the violence in this movie is brilliant. I think the violence is exactly the type of lurid, over the top, borderline hilarious tone I would want for a film of this nature. And I think when Lynch does violence, it always comes out comical on some level, you know.
You gotta get that thing sewed back on. They sew them things back on. Works good as new. I can't find it. Where is the damn thing? Gotta be in here somewhere.
What did you think about the violence, Duncan? I want to bring you in on that.
I mean, to me, that's just a David Lynch component. Like, to me, he always shows violence as a way to make you feel like a real threat in the film. So there's like stakes. Like, for example, another like classic Lynch trope is the second they introduced the Santos character, the actor playing him, like that's just immediately a David Lynch villain. The way he's talking about how he's going to shoot you through the back of the head so it comes out the front, so it causes more brain damage. Like, and even the way that, like, even though they present the mother as like the ultimate evil witch, etc., even she's not as evil as some of the people she invokes and like brings into her charge, as it were. So to me, that's the part that I think people always get lost about with David Lynch is I feel like they think it's the opposite. It's like a bit of what I talked about in the Blue Vault one. They think it's that, like, look, this is society, but really beneath it, everyone is evil and dark, which I don't see at all. I agree with you. It's always that actually there's innocence, and that is American life. And then there's these invading, actually typically portrayed as demonic or like supernatural elements trying to like feast on innocence itself. It's not the idea they're perverting, they're actually trying to like consume it and eat it and destroy it, and you're having to hold that at bay with these heroic characters.
Exactly,
so,
the
and
thing
then
with
also,
Twin Peaks, ultimately, you know, it was like her father. By the way, like, you know, child abuse is this horrific thing that happens in homes, you know, of any denomination. It can happen anywhere. And, you know, for David Lynch's interpretation of that, as you said, is that it was like he was possessed by a demon in and of that moment. Like David Lynch conceptualizes, you know, the I don't know what you would call it, like demonity, is that a word? But like the demonic aspect and the humanity, they're in direct opposition.
That's why I think that scene actually is necessary to some of the themes with the film between Lula and Bobby Peru, is because without the knowledge of her rape, you know, first off, as you said, she appears to have at least partially overcome it from what we can see. in the first part of this film, and when she's confronted with something again, she freezes. We get the allusion back to the Wizard of Oz with her tapping her like clicking her red heels together, trying to go home, like she's trying to return to her innocence, right? Or she's trying to return to a place where she felt safe. And ultimately, even though he doesn't do anything, she still perseveres after that moment, right? And I do think that this is, you have to interpret this as her youth and her innocence are capable of overcoming this darkness that has been inflicted upon her. Now, we can argue whether that's realistic or not, but I think that's the message David Lynch is trying to give.
I still just think, though, it's like, especially having watched it so soon after Blue Velvet, which also had that questionable, Dennis Hopper stuff where he plays with the idea of consent in that way that many people misinterpret Straw Dogs as having done. It does that's the only thing that can really make me like a little bit squeamish.
Yeah, but this is art. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, yeah. And art, nothing is forbidden, everything's permissive. Yeah, I get it. But I mean, like, what I'm trying to say is that ultimately, I think there's you have to remember when you're making a film, there are two things going on, and that is that there is this aspect of the movie that is being made where you are creating a story, creating a piece of art that you are then going to put out commercially for people to experience, and then there is the aspect of the filmmaking itself where there are definitely some type like fucking Eli Roth, kickstarting torture porn. The dude who made the sequel to The Human Centipede. Do I believe these people have like great thoughts about like the nature of, fucking what it is to be a victim of a sexual assault or blah, blah, blah. No, I actually don't think they do. I think they're going for shock value, and I think a lot of it is tawdry and a lot of it is cheap. And in some cases, I think there's a voyeuristic component.
Well,
that
the question is this exploitation?
No, I'm not saying.
Not,
yeah.
Right?
I'm not saying Lynch. I think Lynch has walked up to that line, is what I'm saying. I think he's walked up to the cliff of the act of the film making itself being exploitative in that.
I'm actually curious where you stand on
over the edge.
A Clockwork Orange now.
Well, you see, the whole point about that is it's about this how eventually all sexual desire when mixed with violent desire will kind of like funnel you into this place that you end up in. And so, what does him and the droogies like to do on a weekend? They don't just want to fight each other, they want to fuck as well, and I mean fuck in the most violent and aggressive way you can use that word. I'm not talking about having like, a fucking bunk up with the missus. I'm talking about they will take it by force if they need to. Sure. They will relish in doing that. And so with A Clockwork Orange, I think the fact that it is explicitly punctuated that they are rapists. They have done it before. They'll do it again. And that scene is kind of essential to understanding that, like this is what this gang does. I think it's actually done in it's actually as tastefully handled as you could handle a rape scene, because first of all, you never see any of it actually committed, and then second of all, they go for this almost like Dada-esque absurdity of them taking a giant penis sculpture that just so happened to be in the building and literally pushing it into the
singing in the rain, no less.
Yeah,
like the juxtaposition of that.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Exactly. Yeah, ready for love. That's what they're doing. So I mean, like, I don't have a problem with that. But what I thought with this was, it's like, first of all, I don't have a problem with being a rape victim for the storyline. I think, if anything, one aspect that we've missed off talking about that is she says, oh, Mom, you can believe my mother knew nothing about that. But as Duncan said, she walked right in. Her mother does know about it, and her mother has essentially like done something about it
and killed the guy who did it.
Yeah. But also in that moment, ultimately wasn't a comfort. Her first thought wasn't to comfort her daughter. Her first thought was to lash out at the guy who did it. By the way, tacitly, he's been allowed to go into their home because of what a fucking flake the mother is. She's complicit and responsible on some level.
even think about that. Like the mother's actual power is sexual power over the men in her lives, even the assassins. And her idea is she gets out in trouble when she can't control the person anymore, or they're already set in motion, as it were, to do the kill, etc. So like the whole film's also like that aspect as well of like in some ways you could say the young love is like pure and innocent, whereas that is like the sort of like transactional use that maybe an older person might use of sex.
Laura Dern's actual mother, by the way.
Oh, really? Fair enough.
Yeah. Laura Dern's
also interesting. She was in Chinatown, if people don't know that, but actress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, correct. Yeah. So I mean, I think it's just that scene bringing it back, because it's like it doesn't go anywhere. Right. So when you have a scene, this is just Richard Lewis's approach to filmmaking. When you have a scene, the scene has to do something and connect to the broader arcs of the story you want to tell within the film. And so when I sit down and I watch a scene, I'm always thinking to myself, what does the scene serve? And so the obvious answer here is it makes you dislike Bobby Peru. But why do I need to dislike Bobby Peru in this way, in this moment? I actually don't. There's a million other ways you can make me dislike him. I already know he's a creep. I already strongly suspect that whole thing about him being a Marine is stolen valor. They kind of like leave that just hanging out. They don't really elaborate on that. He's talking about that battle he was in and gets antsy about it. But like, you know, was he there? Was he not? He's just got a single tattoo on his hand. Doesn't exactly look like a Marine, but who fucking knows? So you could have done it in a million other ways. Ultimately, Sailor doesn't find out about it. But by the time it would have mattered, Bobby Peru's dead. He's been gunned down in a failed bank robbery and blown his own head off as he falls.
A feed
to his
store
knees.
robbery. Excuse me.
Yeah. Sorry.
This is America, sir.
Yeah. So
a feed store.
I'm just like that. If I take that scene out the movie, it changes nothing about any of the story arcs, anything that happens. You know what I mean? And it's like,
this isn't a film about. I would argue this isn't a film about story arcs. It's a film about how you feel scene in this film.
Definitely broad arcs. I mean, like you say, they're star-crossed lovers, family trying to break them up, classical aspects of Romeo and Juliet. We've got the whole Wizard of Oz allegory we've yet to touch upon.
If anything, I feel like the Wizard of Oz allegory is just completely unnecessary in this movie.
I mean, also potentially true. It was something David Lynch added as he was adapting the screenplay. It's not in the novel again. But anyway, you know, it's ultimately their transition from being star-crossed lovers with all these terrible forces beset upon them that are conspiring to tear them apart, and it's ultimately the transition into adulthood and becoming a nuclear family in modern America. That's what we've got, and we arrive at that destination courtesy of a hilarious final scene where Nick Cage walks up to a street gang from the 50s, calls them the spicy F words, is knocked unconscious, and then sees the fucking Glinda, the good witch of the East or whatever, and is told to go back to his family. But I mean, you know, like I think we all arrive in all the place. Everything's tied up pretty well. Yeah, like it's just like I said. For me, the scene just stands out as being. It's like I said, I didn't want to use the word gratuitous. That's about as gratuitous as I think anything David Lynch has ever done in any of his films. More than Mulholland Drive. But other than that, I mean, like it's not like I had any. I certainly don't have any problems with the film on that level. It's like it's an artistic choice that just didn't work for me. Everything else in the film, ultimately, I would say does. I love the hilarious depiction of organized crime. I love the thing with the $2 silver coins, reminiscent of like the whole John Wick thing. You know, you buy the hits with these coins that aren't actual monetary value. They're symbolic, contained within this like shadowy world of organized crime we don't really know anything about.
And Mr. Reindeer and his harem of topless women.
It's ridiculous. I love Big Tuna as just this shithole 600 population dust bowl in Texas. Just fantastically realized. I mean, I've driven through places like that, you know, when I lived in the South. And so I really like everything about the movie. It's just, as I said, it's just this one little weird choice that kind of like stood out because it goes on a while as well. It's not a short scene, you know. It's not like just something he did in passing. Like you say, there's a monologue attached to it, But I mean, obviously, we haven't even really talked about Willem Dafoe. Like the movie might arguably get better when he arrives. I think he's great in it. Like,
by the way, along those lines, this is also actually quite a long film. But I didn't find. I told you in Blue Velvet, I did find some of the scenes like build up very slowly. I actually found this just to be really enjoyable. I was just kind of taking it at almost the 30 frames a second or whatever. I wasn't thinking about like how much further is there, where were they at in the plot. Like I actually just enjoyed it just for like all these little weird scenes about like bizarre aspects of America.
Pigeons spread diseases and mess up the place. You see that?
I mean, I think for 2 hours for its runtime, it's kind of crazy to think it even got to 2 hours because ultimately, as I said, the connective tissue has largely been stripped out, but it juggles a lot of plot elements. Because I mean, like we didn't do the synopsis this episode, but ultimately the plot elements, it's like Nick Cage and Laura Dern are on the run, and they're being hunted down by hitmen.
3 different people.
Yeah, but
a private detective.
Yeah, and meanwhile, a private
and
detective
her
is
mom
also trying to find him. Yeah, exactly. All of that's happening, and then they end up with Big Tuna. They end up kind of stuck there, and then you get the aspect of like the pregnancy thing comes out. That bizarre. I'm pretty sure it has to be a metaphor for like they just leave the puke in the room, or maybe David Lynch just really liked that shot of the flies eating the sick. I don't know. And then they're kind of stuck there for a while, and then that's when fucking Bobby Peru comes in, and then all of a sudden he's trying to maybe get with Laura Dern, but maybe not, and then setting up Sailor to do this,
but also trying to assassinate Sailor.
But he's also going to assassinate him
after his feed, Richard, his feed store robbery. Please, it's not that.
Sorry. I know.
You say bank robbery, but it really does a disservice to the fact that this movie is trying to be redneck.
Yeah, I know. It's like it's so hard to conceive of like what they're actually robbing. It's like so depressing. It's kind of like oh shit, what's that one with Philip Seymour Hoffman? Before the Devil Knows You're Dead.
Yeah, that's a Lumet film. Yeah.
Yes, another little sleeper movie that not a lot of people are seeing. It's kind of like that in just how shit the robbery actually is, and yet it unravels everything. You know, you're doing 6 years in prison for violating parole and like and holding up this building, this establishment. If you'd got away with it, you would have had $2,500, which even in 1990 is like a fucking pittance. It's a fucking joke.
It's a king's ransom and Big Tuna.
Well, I mean, yeah, could have spent it on Jack and Lone Star. But yeah, I mean, it's as I said, it is a very. There's so much going on in terms of all the different story elements. And then, like you say, you layer the Wizard of Oz allegory on top of that, which, you're right, does it need to be there? They don't really hammer it too much.
I mean, they do, though, because they refer to the road as the Yellow Brick Road.
Yeah, Yellow Brick
When they
Road,
get to Big Tuna, they are saying, well, it sure ain't the Emerald City. And then they have the good and bad witches. And, you know, it is... I would say having Lula's mother send everybody out like the flying monkeys chasing her, if you're going to make that analogy, is kind of funny.
She melts at the end, man.
She melts at the end. I don't know.
It's great. It's great.
But
I loved all of that.
For me, sure, it adds this extra element of Americana to it, but I'm not sure it actually bolsters the themes of the film. That's my problem with it. It doesn't actually seem to like help me feel something different about this movie.
Yeah, I think you probably have to go a little bit harder on it, a bit more visual elements, because look, obviously red slippers, cool. There's that entire scene where they're just in a green room.
Really? You think they have to go harder on it? She's literally like her mom is the wicked witch. Ghost of her is broomstick riding next to the car. And then Glinda just appears in a magic pink bubble at the end.
Yeah,
Richard, you want them to go harder?
Yeah, I actually think they should have done. I actually think if you're gonna lean into it as an allegory. Absolutely. You know, if you're driving down Yellow Brick Road and you're calling it the Yellow Brick Road, show me the Yellow Brick Road. Make it a Yellow Brick Road. Do it. You know, like I just think it's kind of one of those things where I think I think I don't know which one of you guys said it, but I think Lynch was really trying to layer on a bit more of that, you know, that classic Americana, the things that we associate, you know, with film and kind of America's heyday, and you know what an achievement The Wizard of Oz is, and kind of working that in there. I also think it's a good thing for, like, you know, it's something you watch when you're a kid, isn't it? Makes this huge, big impression when you go from the black and white to the Technicolor and all of that stuff. And it's, you know, there's probably something there about, you know, that's kind of like the journey they were on, the black and white, the drabness of their lives, suddenly being on the road, charged, everything's vibrant. Yeah, I get it.
It is an innocent adventure at the end.
Yeah.
And I will say, if he is trying to underscore a theme of innocence, that will be something that literally every American that watches that film will be familiar with, right?
Mm-hmm.
As an example of innocence.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think for me, I think probably I mean, put it this way, I'm glad that he changed the ending. I think this film would have sucked if it ended on a downer. Because one of the things that I think was kind of implied, you know, when he was talking to the chick who he said, we had a deal back in the day, and if anyone was going to kill you, I'd tell you, and if anyone was coming to kill me, you tell me, which is kind of also like just a wild agreement to have with
also
anyone
just a very naive take on things. If he had a contract and she was a criminal, like, wouldn't you expect her just to lie to you and then try and kill you?
But like, what I thought was interesting there was, right, like, she is wearing a tight black leather outfit like Lula. She's got dyed blonde hair like Lula, the red lips, the black eyebrows that don't match the hair. And I was like, are they trying to imply here that, like, you know, he's got a type and he's with him for a while, and then he like walks off, and then he gets another one, a replacement kind of model? Like, was she like the proto Lula from back in the day? And obviously with the original storyline, him just saying, like, he just spent 5 minutes with a family 5 minutes with a child, and what I assume they're going to drive off and get married somewhere. They're going to elope, and he goes, "You know what, baby? I'm just not a good enough man. You should be around me now. Here's an anecdote from one of my favorite westerns. I'm done."
Oye, amigo. If ever something don't feel right to you, remember what Pancho said to the Cisco Kid. Let's win before we're dancing at the end of a rope without music.
And then, like, obviously in the original book, he walks away. Apparently, the only reason David Lynch added the scene is he called Barry Gifford, and he said, like, "You're writing sequels right now, yeah? So do they get back together?" And he said, "Yeah, they do." And he said, "Okay, cool. I'm gonna add a happy ending to this movie." But if it didn't have a happy ending, it would have been a worse.
I mean, it would have undermined everything that I think he thematically built up to that point in time.
Also, great end sequence. Just Nick Cage legitimately singing "Love Me Tender," the entirety of it, while the camera's just doing a fucking 360 around him and the titles are rolling. That's like a pretty audacious way to end a film, to be fair.
Love me tender, love me true, all my dreams fulfill.
I do think that we should dive into the Roger Ebertness of this, because look,
have you already looked into this, Duncan? He surpasses himself this time, sir.
Dude, it is next fucking level, by the way. Roger Ebert's outrageous takes. I thought his takes about Gladiator were bad, guys. It is insane. So as Richard alluded to earlier,
terrible, but he still gave it 2.5 stars. It doesn't. His star system doesn't even align to the shit that comes out of his mouth. It's like crazy.
He talks bad shit about this, but it's not only so. There's 2 different articles. One of them is his reviews, and then he also wrote on May 27th, 1990, an article from Cannes called "David Lynch Gives Filmgoers All They Can Handle." So he actually has 2 articles about this, and the Palme d'Or at Cannes, guys, if you don't know, many of you probably know, it's one of the most prestigious awards you can win as a filmmaker. It's given to the director, and it's only given out. Well, I guess it's sometimes given out to 2 movies, but most of the time given out to 1 movie annually at Cannes. And this won it. So people clearly thought this was a compelling movie, even if it was divisive and showed directorial promise. So David Lynch received this award. And apparently, Roger Ebert actually was leading the chorus of boos to fucking boo David Lynch when he was accepting the Palme d'Or.
Reminder, he gave a perfect score to 500 Days of Summer. I'll always put that into the mix of the gumbo just to remind you.
But he even says in his review, now comes Wild at Heart, which won the Palme d'Or at this year's Cannes Film Festivals, to great cheers and many boos, some of the latter from me. So he's proud of the fact that he was booing this film, and he really hates David Lynch.
Because you would think only like an ignorant fan would do that. You would think no artist themselves in any context or someone who appreciates art would ever like boo something. Here's the thing. You walk out if you don't like it. You don't go like, I'm going to ruin the vibe for everyone else. Like, that's crazy. You know, what a mad angle. What a fucking mad angle that is.
Yeah, I mean, it's like so crazy to think that someone could like look at something like this and like, I understand why it was divisive for sure. But I mean, when you look at like the other movies that were out that went to Cannes that year, you know, Roger Ebert's problem was like he's always been in French movies, right? Quite historically, and like Cyrano de Bergerac was out that year, the Gerard Depardieu
one. It is a good movie. That is a good.
Yeah,
but Cyrano, look, Cyrano is an interesting play that got turned into many movies, but it is. Look,
I've seen about 500 different versions.
It's a very saccharine piece of literature, right? And it's super cheesy and it's super melodramatic, and that is a good version of it. But I want to read some of this from you because I think this is just going to tilt Thorin.
Perfect.
I love this paragraph from his article from Cannes, which is, the dominant feeling I took with me from Wild at Heart was despair. David Lynch is a gifted filmmaker who, for one reason or another, has backed himself into a corner of satirical self-mockery and feels trapped there. He may tell himself that his movies are commentaries on popular culture, but actually, they are pop culture. There is no ironic distance, no personal angle, just the willingness to go over the top and give the mob even more of what it wants.
Yeah, that's the other weird aspect to it. Roger Ebert seems to think David Lynch isn't being genuine.
Yes, that's what's so weird to me.
Yeah, he says like David Lynch could make good films if he didn't want to serve up. It says here, he is a good director, and if he ever goes ahead and makes a film about what's really on his mind, instead of hiding behind sophomoric humor and the cop-out of parody, he may realize the early promise of his Eraserhead. But he likes the box office prizes that go along with his pop satires, so he makes dishonest movies like this one. Like, the last thing you can ever say about David Lynch as a filmmaker is that his movies aren't honest to what he wants to do, that they are somehow created to chase after an... He's never even made, I don't even think, over the entirety of his career, I think he would make one movie for like one of the big studios. He would never get asked back to do it again. You know, this guy has made quite unashamedly the movie he wants, like whatever it might be. Any time he makes a film, and he barely made any in a long career, ultimately, it's always the film he wants to make. He's always gone out there and secure funding for it and all this other bullshit.
What's so frustrating, Richard, is like, I don't understand how you can have this interpretation in this movie, because yes, there are some funny scenes about violence, but it's literally I feel like this film is David Lynch's battle against nihilism, is what I feel like, where he is literally doing the over the top violence, right, to show nihilistic elements, and he kind of crosses that line into humor from violence, but it's all anchored by Lula and Sailor's relationship, which is incredibly wholesome. And there is something very uplifting about their love, as naive or innocent as it may be, because it survives everything, all the fucking nihilism that's thrown at it. It survives all the violence. It survives all the fucked up people who are trying to destroy them for no reason. It survives fate fucking Sailor over and putting him in jail. But how you could not feel... I just don't understand how you can look at this movie and just not feel good at the end of it, or say that the primary emotion was despair.
Yeah, Roger Ebert's never been able to, like, read the room, essentially. Like, he just doesn't seem to be able to... Whenever he reviews a movie, he just seems to come away with the complete, like, wrong message. In fact, actually, when I think about all the great movie critique and essays I've ever written where I've gone, wow, that's really insightful. Why didn't I spot that? Why didn't I think of that? I've never felt that way about anything Roger Ebert's ever said. And yet he's like, one of the greatest critics in American history, apparently. But yeah, absolutely terrible. I mean, like, there's nothing drenched in despair about this movie. The bad guys lose unilaterally. The horrible, malignant cunt of a mother, she melts at the end. By the way, just brilliantly realized character of the way that, like, manipulative women can operate, that they can be terrible villains as well. Swaggering around, drenched in gin. Fucking...
I did like the touch where if she's supposed to be the Wicked Witch, that she never touches water because she's always drinking a martini. That was
always like a martini or whatever the fuck, and she's just like, swaggering around, drinking that. But ultimately, she's left. There are no men in her lives for her to even manipulate anymore. Keep in mind as well, the whole problem stems from the fact that she's so bitter and disgusting. She propositioned Sailor, is what sets off this whole chain of events from the start of the movie. And he said, absolutely not, I love your daughter. And because of that, she, he's got to die now. And some other bits and pieces along the movie. She's like a brilliantly realized character, but she's left with nothing at the end. Absolutely zero. The only people that get anything that they sought after are the two main protagonists, like... Bobby's dead. He fucking doesn't walk away with his money. The killers get nothing. The crime syndicate, I suppose, is still going to go on in the background, minus a few of the lesser cogs in the machine. Nothing happens to the kids. Yeah. Well, I don't get how you could come away from this movie feeling despair at all. I just don't get that. Thought this, but put it this way: this is one of his. He makes a lot of optimistic movies. This is one of his most optimistic. It has a conventional Hollywood happy ending. So,
just very, very strange. But yeah, I
know something mental. I looked it up. He gives Lost Highway 2 stars, but he gives Mulholland Drive 4. I don't even know what his rating scale is at this point in time. I have no idea where this guy's at. It doesn't even make any sense, does it?
I'm not even sure he is. But then again, you see, and I have to say this, I haven't watched Mulholland Drive in a long, long time, but I do remember it fondly, and I suspect I'm coming into it thinking that's going to be the best one. That's going to be the best movie. And when we laid the arc out, it's going to maybe be Blue Velvet, but probably Mulholland Drive. And so I'm going to be devastated if it isn't. I'm going to be devastated if I watch Mulholland Drive and think it's shit.
I saw it a couple years ago, so I still thought it was good. I've seen it somewhat recently.
I think this film is the most palatable of the David Lynch films that we put out there. Like, I think this is the one that people could, like you said, you actually even could have just left out any of the surrealistic elements. It would still just work as one of those films, like a road trip movie with all Americana bits put in. So it's actually not one of those ones if people are worried and they've only ever seen the surrealistic things. They're like, oh, am I going to get it? I was like, no, don't worry about that. It's actually quite straightforward. Essentially, just enjoy the performances and the little vignettes and people weaving in and out of the story.
I wonder.
Yeah, I agree. It's very conventional. It's Lynchian, but it's a very conventional story. Another thing he doesn't really get a lot of credit for. David Lynch actually does tell pretty conventional stories. Like, people ascribe the surreality of Eraserhead to a lot of his later work, and it's like, it was actually towards the end where he kind of, like, you can make an argument that a lot of great artists become parodies of themselves, because ultimately the final destination, as we all know, is the terrible Inland Empire. which is just like if I got a moron who knew nothing about film and I said make me a David Lynch film, that's what you would get. The sad truth is
it's like the most self-indulgent film ever, basically. It's just like everything that if you don't like the surrealist, is that taken to infinity, almost absurdity.
But you know, a lot of his earlier stuff, it's like Blue Velvet has aspects of the surreal, but it's still a pretty straightforward
Mate, the one that I hate is you don't have to like the Dune film. It's not a good film. It has some very bad performances, but the aesthetic is unbelievable. Now, yes. Some of that's H.R. Geiger and things that were going to be in the Jodorowsky one, but it is still like what he puts on screen is still art. There's still some incredible aspects to that film.
I mean, look, I've said this. There are some parts of 1984 Dune that I prefer to the Villeneuve.
I actually love his the Paul Atreides transformation sequence. I think it's way better than the Villeneuve one.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. The problem I've got right from the outset is though, like Paul Atreides is meant to be a 15-year-old kid. It's like Kyle MacLachlan rocks up. That was always a problem. Like the casting,
really?
Unfortunately.
You see, my problem is that it starts with Princess Irulan in space, and then she does a monologue, and then fades out, and then says, "Oh wait, I forgot to tell you about Dune," and then goes on another monologue, and I'm like, why did we fade her out? I mean, it's just weird.
Yeah.
It is, though. The actual things like the navigator and stuff, when you consider the era without CGI, it's unbelievable. That still holds
also
up to
the ships. The spaceships and the way they do those kind of Gothic sequences of all of the little like drop ships flying into the ships that are going to travel through hyperspace.
If you haven't seen the Jodorowsky's Dune, the people who were behind this film, the original one that was going to be Jodorowsky's, later made Alien. That's why it has all the same and think about it. Doesn't everyone say that Alien is the best like sci-fi to have like atmosphere and fucking like a mystique around the law, which obviously they now mined the fuck out and destroyed. But at the time, that was one of the most iconic things about Alien.
Yeah.
So actually, if anything, that's the film that shows. The joke is that's the film where David Lynch was having to kowtow to the studios and put some of his shit in there, but he has certain things where his hands are tied, and it is an unfilmable script, and it is essentially they've almost only picked him because it's like we're picking you as the lesser of two evils over Jodorowsky, and it's like if anything, that was the potential dark path that David Lynch goes down, where he just becomes like one of these brilliant directors that just does like mainstream movies with a tiny bit of himself in. If anything, these are the films where he just embraces his own vision.
Yeah, I mean, and as I said, it's like these are pretty conventional stories. Blue Velvet, kid stumbles onto something, horrible, criminal underworld, tries to free some woman out of like sexual slavery, essentially. But
by the way, it's a very wholesome story. It's like I say, it's almost like a Hardy Boys story with like fucked up violence and surrealism added into it. Like the first parts are totally like it's sort of young adult novel almost.
Yeah, because he doesn't know what he's getting into. He's literally that's a great point. He literally is just Hardy Boying it, trying to get into her apartment. He doesn't know he's gonna get involved in this fucking watching this horrible rape from the closet in Blue Velvet. That's not what he signed up for. He was just in for some adventure and hijinks, right?
Yeah, and it's also such a childish like approach to the problem. I'll sneak into a house and see if anything bad is happening. It's like, what the fuck Scooby fucking do? That's like, that's what that is. But I mean, then like obviously, Twin Peaks. As I said, I think Twin Peaks is fucking brilliant, and I don't think it's brilliant because of all the surrealism. I think what makes Twin Peaks brilliant is, first of all, it is unapologetically melodramatic by design. This was David Lynch saying, I want to make a daytime soap opera that just has these like dark overtones, and he made that. But I also think what's brilliant is through the mechanism of Cooper, his Native American partner, his Tibetan giant he sees in his dreams, they get to introduce all these like aspects of like philosophy, which are like actually quite highbrow, and certainly for anyone that was watching a fucking American melodrama, like, well, here's some thoughts from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Like, you're not putting that in fucking Days of Our Lives, are you? And so David Lynch there got to make what he wanted to make, but again, it's incredibly earnest. It's incredibly earnest and optimistic, a lot of it. I mean, again, with the exception of the dark ending, which if memory serves me correct, I don't know if that was a deliberate cliffhanger leaving Cooper in the Red Lodge, in the Black Lodge, all of that time in the Red Room.
I like how we're just spoiling Twin Peaks ridiculously.
No, here's the thing.
show.
That's a show is so spaced out, and they'll forget all
30
those
years old
details
now, bro.
anyway. Yeah, exactly. Also, to me, I actually think that connects to what you were saying earlier. That's where I can tell people like fucking Ebert just saw Eraserhead and went, "Wow, it's one of those wanky sort of like surrealistic directors, much like a European art house director." I love those. The public's going to hate this, so I'm going to say 3 stars. Like they're waiting for that shit, and they're actually annoyed. I think that he then makes all these incredibly earnest love letters to America and like the classic golden era of America, which already has faded by like 30, 40 years at this point in time in the Cold War. So I think like the thing about Twin Peaks is this: if Twin Peaks is what the critic thought, then it would be set in like fucking Harlem or something. Instead, he takes an incredibly like idyllic, just normal fucking everyday town and puts that over a hellmouth with all evil shit infecting coming into people. And even so, the best part is, this is where the soap opera part works fantastically. It isn't all like that. It is punctuated by scenes that are extreme like that, but like a Donnie Darko or something. But then it goes into just everyday mundanity. It is just someone ordering coffee. It is just someone having a little conversation with their neighbor. It's just someone following up a little lead and doing it in an incredibly wholesome, like just normal American way. Like that, as I say, the overarching theme I want people to take from these films is the idea this person is nihilistic or hates America. It's like, I don't know what films you're watching, mate. I don't see that at all. I actually see it, if anything, as like a dark visionary trying to almost like write like almost wholesome films. They just happen to be infused with his own darkness, you know.
He's
Dale
like a
Cooper
warrior of the
Washington
light
and
battling
falls
against
in
the
love.
darkness. It's crazy.
Yeah, like he comes from Washington and he can't get enough of staying in Twin Peaks. All the other agents hate it. They hate going there, but Dale Cooper puts down roots in the community because
I know, and he talks. He loves all the folksy whittling, and he loves it. He adores it. He loves the fucking donuts and the shitty diner coffee.
Obviously, that aspect of Cooper's personality unequivocally an insert for Lynch. Definitely. You know, without doubt. You know, the love of coffee, the love of pie. This is David Lynch. Like, these are the things David Lynch loves. David Lynch loves to go to a diner and eat pie and
David
smoke.
Lynch, loved black coffee, and I love the line in Twin Peaks where he's like, "Coffee, black as midnight on a moonless night." I mean,
it's so good, like just little things. But anyway, so back to Wild at Heart. As I said, this might also be kind of like the linchpin because ultimately David Lynch, in a very short period of time, attained a lot of success after having ultimately been kind of cast out by the studio system by this point. Doom was an unequivocal failure. Lost Money was critically panned. The Elephant Man was a studio movie that, while critically acclaimed, you know, was kind of, you know,
I mean, it's weird.
You know, and like it didn't necessarily have the mainstream, you know, kind of cachet. Blue Velvet he's back on the radar for everyone again. But in 1990, he is writing the pilot for Twin Peaks. He gets given a book called Wild at Heart. He's like, they thought he'd hate it. They just said, "Oh, have a look at this and tell us what you think." He loved it, made a movie, wins a Palme d'Or, and then gets optioned to have a 30-episode American drama that anyone, by the way, will tell you from that time, television was never the same after Twin Peaks. I think about the PlayStation 2 commercials, you know, like, and how they were Lynchian, you know, and everything was Lynchian. Everybody wanted to be the next Twin Peaks, but you couldn't do it because it comes from such a unique mind and a unique approach. And then obviously Fire Walk with Me, where he makes a movie prequel to Twin Peaks that is kind of dark in a way that didn't come naturally to Lynch, I think. It's kind of horrific, some of the scenes in that. It's still got Lynch's fingerprints all over it.
I'm guessing he couldn't have at the time put that on TV, some of that stuff. That's what I always felt like he was letting loose on that, you know.
Yeah. And then after that, though, it's pretty much like you say. I mean, the rest of his movies, he's only got 4 more studio movies after that point, and with the exception of The Straight Story, they might be that part of the artist's career where they all invariably become caricatures. Like, you know, Hunter S. Thompson became the caricature, like he was drugs and every story has to begin with some wild caper he's involved in, and people are just like, oh yeah, all right, come on, man, we get it, Fear and Loathing, yeah, you know. A lot of people were critical of his later output, you know, or you know, filmmaker. I mean, like fucking.
When you say it for almost every great filmmaker, Richard, think about them all.
Scorsese, yeah.
Scorsese, Coppola, fucking what's another one I'm thinking of? Like they all, Tarantino, they all just become like the joke becomes. I've always made this joke that like because the fucking Rolling Stones wouldn't stop touring, eventually they just became the world's best Rolling Stones tribute act because they weren't. What you loved about the Rolling Stones in the 70s was they were this fresh, vibrant band with all attitude and new music, and then they're doing the same songs 40 years later. That's what they all become. Like Scorsese just starts making Scorsese films, but 30 years later. Or what even the same actors, the same going to the same well. Tarantino at this point is actually a parody of himself. Even if the films are good, they're not the visionary that broke into Hollywood and changed the whole scene and everyone had to buy the scripts. Now they're just like it's like the caricature of what the Simpsons would have Tarantino do in a Tarantino movie. Like
Coppola's a really good Coppola's a really good example of like what being totally washed up kind of looks like, because you know, from the guy that did The Godfather, Godfather 2, Apocalypse Now, fucking I can't even think of anything off the top of my head, but he did other good movies. Rumblefish is another one, right? Like this is the guy who towards the end of his career, he did have The Rainmaker, which is okay, but he did Godfather Part 3, awful. Jack, remember that Robin Williams fucking?
I do.
Remember that? That was Francis Ford Coppola, dude.
That's so crazy.
Right? Like his new one that came out, that Megalopolis.
Or Megalopolis. I haven't seen it yet. Have you seen it?
Megalopolis. It is conceivably the worst film ever made, actually. and it was all self-funded. He funded it himself.
I know. Which honestly,
he's lost a ton of money on it.
Shout out to that guy. He sold, because in California he actually has a winery that's very good that I would buy wine from when I lived in California. And he sold a chunk of his winery to fund that movie. So, I mean,
do you want to know how bad it is?
Huge balls.
So the budget was $130 million, right? The box office was 14.
I know, but think about this. Like, what a legend. Look, I don't care if the movie sucks. The fact that he self-funded it because he wanted to make this movie before he died is fucking awesome. I love that.
I actually think that part's genius. Think about it, right? You've already done all these other films. No one will bankroll you anymore. So the premise is like, do I just die with a load of money in the bank? Or do I just say, fuck it, and just do the movie I want? Yeah, you just did it.
I love the premise. I just don't love the end product. The end product is absolute go. But to relate this again to what we're talking about with Lynch, there is a real potential that we're going to find. And remember, I haven't watched Lost Highway or Mulholland Drive for many, many years. I remember loving both of the movies. Going into it, I believe Lost Highway is a superior movie to Wild at Heart. Am I going to think that when I watch it now in 2025? I don't know. Mulholland Drive, I think, is his best film. Now, on the trajectory we're just talking about, the chances of that being true is probably impossible, right? That's just not how it works, especially when the movie he made after that was Inland Empire, a failed TV series where he tried to recapture the lost glory of Twin Peaks. So I don't know. And obviously the new Twin Peaks season that came out in 2017, still not watched it because of the trepidation.
I've heard it's really good. I haven't seen it either, but I've heard it's very good.
I haven't watched it yet because of the trepidation I had about Inland Empire. Inland Empire was so jarring. It was so lacking in any quality, narrative cohesion. Even the performances were whack. The actors they had in it, they have some really good actors in Inland Empire. It just sucks it fails on every conceivable level.
It's an example of a film that even if you give it the best will in the world, you can't find a way, and you can't brain fuck yourself to believe it's good, mate. I'm telling you, I tried.
Yeah. So I'm dreading now watching these next two movies because it strongly looks like where we're at in this arc. This is the Lynchian peak. This is where he's at the peak of his powers, winning awards.
Well, you see why I say for me, Lost Highway is where the wave rolls back after that.
Yeah,
because put it this way, spoiler for people who haven't seen it, Lost Highway also has an unbelievable soundtrack where he actually commissioned Trent Reznor and fucking Marilyn Manson, Smashing Pumpkins. It's all in the fucking 90s to make like custom tracks for the soundtrack that are as good as their actual like album material. It's actually fucking phenomenal. So for me, that's the hard part. I think that makes mega. Yeah, he's also on that too. Yeah, he's with Reznor at the time. Yeah,
as well. Yeah. So yeah, I'm kind of dreading it. But to wrap up, start wrapping up the conversation on this one. I really enjoyed it again. I think it upgrades Blue Velvet in some areas. It is lacking a Dennis Hopper. Willem Dafoe doesn't quite measure up, and the fact
he's also
that,
in it for not very long, which is another.
Yeah, this is what I mean. It's like Dennis Hopper is such like a menacing protagonist that every time like he's around, it's like it's really apparent that because of the nature of the story, where there's all these different people coming after them, there isn't really one. I guess the antagonist is Lula's mother. Really, she's the kind of menacing force in this movie. Probably could have done with some more scenes with her. She's great. That actress is fantastic. But ultimately, for me, visually, I think it's more impressive than Blue Velvet. I think the pacing on it is just so rapid. You haven't even really got time to process whether or not you like that scene or that cameo or that weird thing that just happened. And that's great for a road movie. A road movie has to have impetus. A road movie has to have momentum. We're driving from something to something. And so the definition of a great road movie is it keeps on going. It keeps on moving. And so there's definitely that kinetic energy to this film. And ultimately as well, I love Nick Cage. We haven't even really talked about him. He's the actor that, for me, just yes, a coin is tossed every time he takes a part, but he will come at it with something interesting. Will it fail a lot of the time? Yeah. I read a great quote by Tarantino getting ready for this, and he said, as far as he's concerned, Nick Cage is like the jazz musician. David Lynch said he was the jazz musician of actors. Tarantino said, I don't think I've ever seen another actor in the history of film that made a career of being miscast and rising to the occasion. That's a fucking awesome way to think about Nick Cage's career, really. Shows how astute Tarantino is. Because, yeah, I mean, like, he's playing a much younger guy in this movie. He's got to be an Elvis impersonator.
His Southern accent is way better than it was in Con Air. I'm just going to
say there were some parallels I noticed having done Con Air. But I mean, like, I love Nick Cage in this movie. I just love it. I love the ridiculous scene with what Power Mad, the fucking thrash band that they're into, where it all just stops and he makes that dude apologize for bumping into her, then just fucking sing some Elvis while the thrash band start playing it. They jump
and singing the backup vocals of the Elvis song.
Dude, it's like he is so into it in a way that, like, this is a movie where you immediately fuck with Nick Cage if you've seen this movie. And definitely in the win column for him. Awesome performance. And honestly, Laura Dern. I mean, I think like the leads are brilliant in this film. No two ways about it. Laura Dern's not someone I think a lot about when I think about like great Hollywood actors and actresses. She definitely had like a run of films where actually she probably doesn't get as many flowers as she deserves. Because I mean, again, like, we've already done Jurassic Park. We've done loads of Laura Dern films actually at this stage. We've done like she was obviously known for like Jurassic Park and that kind of stuff.
You said it in the past episode. The problem is, unironically, she actually has like tainted her image with the stupid Star Wars film. That's just all people think of when they see her now.
Admiral Gender Studies. Yeah, it's like it's fucked up. Hey, we can say it now. Trump won money. It's safe. It's safe again, right? But yeah, it's like she actually did some fucking good movies back in the day, and probably doesn't get as much plaudits as she deserves. So, just a great road movie. It's energetic, it's kinetic, it's shocking in some parts, and it's just a vibe. You just put this on, and it's over before you know it.
I want.
Hilarious violence at the end. You're in for a great time.
I also want to touch on something else very briefly to wrap up, Richard, which is, you talk about it being very similar to other on the road fugitive love films, But this is also a Southern Gothic film, which makes it even less original in some ways. And this stretches back to William Faulkner and literature. But basically, it's part of a series of pieces of fiction across literature, TV, films, etc., where it's basically just going through the post-Civil War American South and meeting a bunch of weirdos. It's very popular in American fiction if you're not familiar with it.
Sure.
And it goes through all kinds of movies. I mean, and it goes through all kinds of genres. We're looking at a kind of surrealistic Wizard of Oz escape film, but it also is in like vampire movies, like Interview with a Vampire is a Southern Gothic with Tom Cruise in a dilapidated bayou mansion. It's something that's still very much out there today, and films continue to be made about this. And it is really at this point a cornerstone of American fiction. And he takes it's his spin on that as well. And later authors have touched on this too, like Cormac McCarthy, obviously, although he's kind of the Wild West version of that, less kind of Georgia South and more I'm going to be in Texas and New Mexico, but it does have many of the similar elements. And I think you can see that with films that have been derived from Cormac McCarthy's work, like No Country for Old Men, for example. It's a bunch of poor weirdos, and it just flits around from scene to scene, vignette to vignette about these people's lives. But it's another thing that David Lynch draws from here that is not original. Even Lost Boys, the movie that we did, the vampire movie, the Catherine Bigelow movie we did, is also, I would say, a Southern Gothic film where it's a bunch of redneck vampires in an RV driving around, right? Meeting weird people. So it is something that is, I think, very derivative, but what makes it interesting is David Lynch's direction and the way he views the world that makes this an interesting film. I think it's like a 7 out of 10 for me. I enjoyed it, but I don't think it's the greatest thing ever. And I think it does have some flaws with how it's constructed. And I'm not sure I really buy into the Wizard of Oz narrative, or I buy into every scene. But as an experience, it's something that I think everybody should have. You have any final thoughts, Thorin?
No, I think I've said everything.
All right.
Cool.
Well, we'll get into Lost Highway.
Now we enter into the later period. Let's see.
Lost Highway next week, Mulholland Drive after that. Both of these films are on the Criterion channel, I believe, unlike Wild at Heart, which you may have had some trouble finding. So look there. I'm sure you can rent them online too, or use other potentially dubious methods of acquiring your movies if you want to watch along with us. We'll see you next week.